In the last forgotten corner of the world, where moonlight kissed the edges of dreams and wind carried lullabies between ancient trees, there lived a girl named Lyra. She was no taller than a whisper, no louder than a falling feather, and yet the world bent slightly whenever she walked, as if it too longed to listen to her silence. Her cottage stood at the edge of the wishing forest, that sacred hush of trees where no one dared tread past twilight. But Lyra did, every night. She did not fear the forest, for she had grown up with its roots around her heart and its shadows cupped in her palms. It was not a forest to fear, it was a forest that remembered. When she was a child of 5, she had once heard the stars crying. She had slipped out of her window, barefoot on soft moss, and followed the sound beyond the hill where dreams go to rest. There she found the sky torn open, stardust bleeding like golden snow, and in the middle of it all, a broken thread. One of the 1,000 silken cords that wove the universe together had frayed loose, and no one had come to mend it. No one, except Lyra. She didn't know how she knew what to do, but something inside her, some ancient memory not her own, told her to sing. And sing she did. A song without words. A song without time. Her voice trembled like candlelight in the dark, and the sky listened. And as her lullaby rose through the aching air, the frayed thread gently found her fingers. She wove it. She wove it not with her hands, but with her soul. With every heartbeat, the strand glowed warm again, and when it was done, the stars blinked awake and whispered her name into eternity. Star Weaver. That night, the stars gave her a gift. Not a crown. Not a wand. But something far more rare. They gave her silence, the sacred kind. The kind that speaks when all words fail. The kind that holds you like a mother when the world grows too sharp. And so she grew. Years passed like soft pages in a storybook never closed. Lyra became a young woman of quiet magic, unnoticed by the world but deeply known by the moon, the rivers, the winds. Every evening, she would sit beneath the tallest tree in the wishing forest and listen, to the stillness, to the cracks in time, to the hearts of stars. But one night, the silence changed. It wasn't broken. It was wounded. Something ancient had stirred. Something lost and cold, wandering between forgotten constellations. A shadow. A sorrow. A name spoken only once, in the very first dawn. Nyxariel. The stars shivered. And Lyra, the star weaver, felt it too. A tear fell down her cheek. She hadn't cried since she was a child, but tonight the air smelled of goodbye. She stood slowly, the earth trembling beneath her bare feet. The sky above her flickered. A thread had unraveled. Again. But this time. It was hers. The stars no longer whispered. They wept. Lyra stood in the trembling hush of the forest, where silver fog moved like forgotten memories and every branch seemed to bow with sorrow. The air was colder now, not with frost, but with the kind of chill that comes when something sacred begins to fade. Above her, the sky was losing its color, no longer velvet, no longer indigo, but a pale and sickly gray, as if grief had seeped into the heavens. She felt it in her fingertips first, a faint pull, a feather thread tug on her spirit. The same thread she had once mended as a child now writhed loose again, but this time it wasn't celestial. This time, it was part of her. A soul thread. Golden and trembling. Unraveling slowly into the ether. She looked down at her hands. The light beneath her skin, once a soft glow like the warmth of a secret, now flickered unevenly, like a lantern in the wind. The silence around her held its breath. Then, through the veil of trees, came a sound that did not belong to this world. A voice. But not a voice. It was the echo of a lullaby that had never been sung. A song that hovered at the edge of memory, familiar but unreachable, like the smell of someone you once loved in a room long emptied. The voice called her name, not aloud, but inside her bones. Lyra. It was both a question and a cry. She followed it, feet soft against the moss carpet, breath caught in her throat like a thread pulled too tight. The trees moved aside for her, not as though parted by wind, but as if they, too, mourned and made way for their weaver. Past the dreaming stones and the well that drank only moonlight, she came to the hollow. No one had entered the hollow for 100 years. It was said to be the place where lost things went to sleep, old stars, forgotten wishes, broken promises, and names no longer spoken. Tonight, it was open. A ring of willows leaned inward, their silken branches brushing the ground like fingers over a wound. In the center, there was nothing, just emptiness. But not the ordinary kind. This emptiness hummed. It thrummed in the rhythm of grief, of parting, of something once whole becoming many. Lyra stepped inside. The world outside dimmed, as though time itself had exhaled. And then, she saw it. Floating above the earth like a fallen crown was a single strand of light, her soul thread, now frayed at the ends, sparking soft golden tears into the void. And bound to it was a shadow. Not monstrous. Not cruel. But sad. A being made of mist and memory. With eyes like the dusk before a storm. And from its chest bloomed a garden of thorns, blooming silver flowers that bled light when touched. It spoke without sound. You are what I could not keep. Lyra did not run. She did not cry. She did not tremble. Instead, she stepped forward, until she stood nose to nose with the grief-shaped thing, and whispered to the thread. Then let us try again. She reached out. The shadow flinched. But Lyra's hand was light. Not in weight, but in essence. The kind of light that cradles, not blinds. And when her fingers touched the thread, the shadow wept. Not in sorrow. In remembrance. The thread pulsed. And the hollow shivered. A wind rose, not fierce, but full of voices, every echo of every wish ever whispered into the sky. And they all said the same thing. Mend. And so she did. With tears on her cheeks, and the silence wrapped around her shoulders like an old friend, Lyra sang again. Her voice cracked like dawn through frost. And slowly, the thread began to shine. The shadow curled into her arms, and for the first time in 1,000 years, it slept. The shadow slept, and the stars held their breath. Lyra knelt in the hollow with the soul thread cradled between her palms, golden and warm again, but fragile still, like memory just waking from a long, lonely dream. The willows wept softly overhead. Night had grown tender, quiet in a different way now. Not the stillness of sorrow, but of healing. The kind of silence that lingers after a lullaby is sung and a child finally sleeps. And yet, the sky above her remained dim. The stars blinked uncertainly, as if waiting for someone who had not yet arrived. Their songs were soft, incomplete, melodies without endings, prayers without names. Something was missing. No. Someone. Lyra felt the ache bloom within her chest like a winter rose, slow and sharp. It was the sensation of a tether cut loose, of a presence once constant now scattered across the sky. She turned her eyes upward. And the moon was gone. Not veiled by clouds. Not hidden behind storm. Not waning. Gone. Where once there had been a great silver lantern, keeper of dreams, mirror of the soul, there was now only absence. A hole in the heavens where stories once gathered to dance. And Lyra remembered. Not in words, but in ache. She remembered the moon's hum, low and steady, as it passed overhead like an old friend watching over her walks through the wishing forest. She remembered how moonlight would thread through her hair as she wove star songs into dreams. The moon had never spoken aloud. She had never needed to. But now, her silence was wrong. Heavy. Hollow. Forgotten. Lyra rose. The shadow at her feet, still asleep, shimmered softly, its thorn chest rising and falling in a slow, luminous rhythm. She laid a kiss on its misty brow and wrapped it in her old shawl, the one sewn with forgotten lullabies. And then she turned toward the mountain. Mount Illyrian. The sky's spine. where dreams were said to be born from snow and stone. She had never climbed it. No one had. Not since the first night. But Lyra was no longer just a girl with quiet feet and a weaver's touch. She was a seeker now. A mender. A thread finder. And something in her heart whispered that if the moon had forgotten her name, then perhaps it was Lyra's task to remind her. She walked. Through the hush of sleeping trees, past rivers wrapped in frost song, over meadows where starlight lingered like breath on glass. The wind moved beside her, not behind, not against, but beside, as though it, too, remembered the moon and wished to find her again. She did not sleep. Sleep was a gift, and tonight it belonged to those who were still whole. Lyra was unraveling again, in quiet threads of worry and wonder, but she gathered each strand gently, tucking them into her pocket like petals. Even fear had its place in the fabric of hope. And as the first pale blush of dawn painted the edges of the eastern sky, she reached the base of Mount Illyrian. It was taller than she had imagined. And lonelier. Great cliffs stretched skyward, draped in mist that whispered lost names. Caves yawned like mouths sealed in vow. And far, far above, nearly touching the edge of eternity, was the summit of silver echoes. Where, it was said, the moon first learned to reflect the light. Lyra touched the stone with her palm. It was cold, ancient, and familiar. Like something that had once loved her. And she began to climb. The mountain breathed. It was not a loud breath, not the roaring kind of avalanches or the deep groan of shifting stone. No, it was a quiet inhale, the kind that lives beneath silence, tucked between the sighs of time and snowfall. A breath that remembered every footstep, every sorrow that dared to climb its side. And now, it remembered Lyra. Her hands gripped the frost-laced rock, fingers raw, knuckles scraped. Her breath came in silver puffs, curling like mist dancers into the thin air. She didn't count the hours, there were no hours here, only echoes. Time moved differently when the stars watched from above with aching eyes. The wind came at her in waves. Not cruel. Not kind. Just truthful. It told her stories she didn't want to hear, and others she needed. It slipped beneath her hood and whispered to her bones, the way an old friend might, gently, insistently, without permission. You are made of the same sorrow that shaped the skies. You carry light, but also shadow. Do not mend the world if you fear to touch what is broken in yourself. Lyra said nothing back. There was nothing to say. The wind was right. There was a part of her still frayed, a part that trembled in quiet moments, in dreams she never spoke of aloud. A grief unnamed. Not loud. Not wild. Just unfinished. Like the moon. She climbed. Above her, the mountain narrowed to a sharp spine. A ledge here. A cruel jut of stone there. But she kept rising. Not because she was brave, but because something inside her was pulling, always pulling, like thread drawn through fabric, like fate remembering its own weave. At last, she reached a ridge where the sky hung close enough to touch. The wind stilled. The air thinned into crystal. And the world fell away. Below her, a sea of stars. Not overhead, but beneath, as though the earth had turned upside down and the sky now lay beneath her feet. She stood at the place where the veil thinned, where reality exhaled, and wonder took its place. This was where the wind kept secrets. She stepped into the clearing. There were no trees here. No birds. No moss. Only stone etched with glowing lines, ancient runes in languages older than language itself. Each symbol pulsed with quiet rhythm, as if echoing a heartbeat she could no longer hear. In the center of it all was a mirror. But not a mirror made of glass. It was made of stillness. A perfect circle of untouched water, reflecting nothing. Not the stars. Not the sky. Not even Lyra. She approached it, slowly. Her reflection did not appear. Only a whisper rose from the depths. She has forgotten. The voice was small, fragile. Lyra knelt beside the pool. "The moon?" she asked, her voice barely above a breath. "She has forgotten her name," came the reply. "She gave it away. To keep the stars safe." Lyra's heart broke in quiet pieces. The moon had given away her own name, her identity, herself, just to protect those she watched over. She had loved too much. Given too deeply. And in the giving, she had vanished. Lyra touched the pool. The surface rippled. And suddenly, she saw it. A girl of silver skin and hollow eyes, drifting alone through the dark. Her hair was woven of moonlight. Her smile was a memory she couldn't quite remember. She walked among the stars but did not know them. She had no name. She had forgotten who she was. Lyra gasped. The image faded. But the ache remained. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She reached into her satchel, pulled out her needle, her thread, and the single shimmer of her own soul light, saved from the hollow, and she began to weave. Not a tapestry. Not a garment. A name. She wove it from all the pieces the moon had left behind. The lullaby she hummed to oceans. The silver that danced on sleeping faces. The shadows she held gently when no one else could. Lyra did not need to know the name. She only needed to remember why it mattered. And as the final stitch drew through the silent air, a light bloomed from the mirror. Soft. Pale. Familiar. And then, for the first time in what felt like 1,000 years, the moon rose. The moon rose slowly. Not in a blaze, not with grandeur, but with the trembling grace of someone returning home after forgetting the way. She was whole again, but weary. She did not shine to be seen. She shone because she could not help it. Light poured across the sky like melted pearl, softening every wound the dark had left behind. And Lyra, kneeling before the mirror lake, let it wash over her. Not like a blessing. Not like magic. Like memory. Like forgiveness. The wind fell quiet. Even the stars leaned in. And from that hush came a sound like a voice newly born. I remember. It was not loud. It didn't need to be. The mountain exhaled in silver mist. Runes pulsed once, then dimmed, as if bowing in reverence to the light they had once held in silence. Lyra looked up, her cheeks damp, her fingers aglow with golden thread. She smiled. But deep within her, a tremor stirred. Because she knew. The moon was not the only one who had forgotten. There were more. Many more. Hearts unraveled in shadows. Names scattered across the void. Pieces of wonder waiting to be gathered. The light had waited too long. And light, no matter how patient, does not wait forever. Lyra stood. Her knees ached. Her spirit hummed. The path ahead was no longer a question. It was a calling. She would not just mend the sky. She would wake it. She returned to the valley beneath the stars. The wishing forest greeted her not as a traveler, but as one of its own. Leaves shimmered in quiet applause. Owls blinked slowly, recognizing the silver in her gaze. The shadow she had left wrapped in her shawl still lay sleeping. But its breath had changed. Deeper. Steadier. It had begun to dream. Lyra knelt beside it, brushing its misted hair with the gentlest touch. You are safe, she whispered. But I must go where the broken things still sing. From her pocket, she drew a scrap of old parchment, burned at the edges, cracked by time. It had been given to her by an elder in a dream long ago, back when her magic was still a secret. She had never opened it, not fully. Now, the ash-flecked folds unfurled like petals. Upon it lay no words. No roads. No compass. Only stars, drawn in charcoal and ember. But they moved. Not drawn as they were, but as they had been. as they might be again. She traced the constellations with a golden thread. And as her finger passed over each point, a soft pulse answered. Each one a sorrow. A silence. A soul unremembered. A name unspoken. She saw their shapes in the weave. The broken flute of Oros. The lost ember of Tylon. The veil of hollow waters. Each one a tale. Each one a wound. The sky was no longer just a map of stars. It was a wound stitched across eternity. And Lyra, the star weaver, was needle and balm. Days turned into starlit paths. Nights became songs without end. Lyra walked where light had once lived and now dared not return. Her feet kissed deserts and mountaintops, ruins and rivers that whispered in forgotten tongues. Each step pulled at her thread. Until one night, the wind tasted of salt and sorrow. She stood on the shore of a sea that did not move. It was not frozen. Not lifeless. Just sleeping. The water shimmered with dreams not yet dreamed, and beneath its surface, faint glows pulsed like breath. Buildings of crystal and shell. Towers of light curled like question marks in the deep. A city lay beneath. Waiting. She stepped into the water. Not swimming. Not sinking. Just entering. The sea welcomed her not as a stranger, but as one who remembered its song. Fish of glass and memory passed beside her, whispering lullabies older than the tides. In the city's heart stood a spire made of sorrow. Inside, a throne. Empty. Cracked. And beside it, a harp strung with strands of moonlight. She touched it. And the notes that echoed forth were not music, but names. One by one. Faint. Fading. She played them into the currents. Each note a call. Each chord a memory mended. And somewhere in the depths, the queen of the drowned light opened her eyes once more. Beyond the sea and the sky and the dreaming ruins lay a desert of dying flame. It was called Ashendred, a place where fire once ruled, but had grown too proud, too lonely, and at last, too cold. There, the flame no longer burned. It flickered with memory only, smoke curling around bones of cities long surrendered. Lyra walked barefoot across black sand. Each step awoke sparks, like old laughter aching to return. In the center of the desert, she found a fire pit. Empty. Cold. And beside it, a child made of coal and silence. Eyes wide. Fingers curled inward. A heart still burning, but trapped. Why won't you burn? Lyra asked. The child answered without speaking. Because I am afraid to be seen again. Lyra did not argue. She simply sat beside the ashes. And she wept. Not from fear. Not from pain. From recognition. The child leaned close. Their breath became embers. And Lyra opened her palm to reveal the thread of starlight once again. Together, they blew on it. Once. Twice. And the fire remembered. Warmth returned, not in fury, not in blaze, but in steady glow. A fire that heals, not harms. The desert exhaled. And a phoenix stirred beneath the ashes, ready to rise once more. But mending is never without cost. Each soul restored, each light rekindled, left its echo in Lyra. A beautiful weight. A quiet ache. Her thread grew thinner. Her heart stretched wider. And still she walked. Through realms unseen. Through songs unsung. Until one night, beneath the world's oldest tree, the one that held the first lullaby ever spoken, she collapsed. Her thread unraveled onto the soil. And the stars blinked in fear. Was it over? But the earth answered first. Roots rose gently around her. And from the shadows came those she had mended. The moon. The sea queen. The child of fire. The dreaming shadow wrapped in her shawl. They sat beside her. held her, wove her. With silence. With stories. With all the love she had once given away. And the stars began to sing. Not just of Lyra. But with her. For she was not just the weaver of others. She was a thread herself, golden, trembling, eternal. Years passed. Not counted in numbers. But in dreams healed. In lights restored. In names remembered. The sky was whole again, not flawless, but full. A tapestry of stardust and sorrow, of joy and becoming. And in its highest arc shimmered a new constellation. The weaver's crown. 7 stars, softly glowing. Each one a life she mended. Each one a light she helped remember. Lyra's cottage still stood in the wishing forest. Some say if you pass by on a night when the moon is full and the trees lean close, you'll hear the soft hum of a needle threading light through silence. And if you look just right into the sky, you'll see that the stars are smiling. For they have not forgotten her. Not now. Not ever. The star weaver lives in every dream made whole. Far beyond the wishing forest, past the veil of things remembered and things forgotten, there lies a place few speak of and even fewer find. It is not marked on any map, for maps do not dare name what cannot be held. It is called Illyrian, the realm of dreams that never returned. These were not nightmares. Not monsters nor fears. But dreams so beautiful, so fragile, that they wandered too far into the stars and lost their way back. Some became starlight. Some became silence. And one had become a boy. Lyra found him at the edge of Illyrian, sitting beneath a willow that bloomed with feathers instead of leaves. His eyes were wide and distant, reflecting not the world before him but one that should have been. He did not blink. He did not speak. But his heart pulsed with color, faint, shifting hues of forgotten joy and unsung music. Lyra knelt beside him. "What did you lose?" she asked gently, voice as soft as thread against skin. The boy didn't answer with words, but the dream around him trembled. The feather willow dropped a single plume, and when Lyra caught it in her hands, she saw a city in the clouds. A sister's laughter. A ship that never sailed. A home never built. A name whispered only once. And never again. "You are made of almosts," she murmured. The boy looked at her then, just for a moment, and tears fell like stars over his cheeks. Lyra reached into her satchel and pulled out her spool of soul thread. It was thinner now, worn from every mending. But still it gleamed, refusing to break. She took the dream's feather and stitched it to the edge of the boy's memory. And then she began to hum. Not a song with notes, but with longing. Not a lullaby of sleep, but of returning. Around them, Illyrian stirred. The dreams, long lost and luminous, began to gather. They remembered. The boy closed his eyes. And smiled. Not because he was found. But because he knew where he belonged. Time had always been slippery. To the stars, it was a spiral. To the river, a song. To Lyra, it was thread. But in the city of Queneth, deep beneath the roots of the eastern mountains, time had stopped altogether. Not paused. Not broken. Just forgotten. The people of Queneth still moved, still lived, still spoke. But they could not tell one moment from the next. Children were born already old. Lovers forgot how long they'd been holding hands. Tears had no beginning and no end. In the heart of the city stood a tower made of shadowed glass. And within it, a single clock, tall, towering, silent. Its hands had vanished. Its chime had rusted. The city pulsed with waiting. Lyra entered through the forgotten gate. No one greeted her, they had forgotten how. But they watched, quietly, as she approached the tower, golden thread trailing behind her like a comet's tail. Inside, dust hung like velvet. She stepped onto the spiral staircase and climbed, Each step a heartbeat, each breath a question. At the top, where the sky looked like fractured mirrors, she found the clock. Its face was blank. Its center wept. She knelt beside it, touched its base. "Why have you stopped?" A voice, ancient and quiet, stirred from the brass. "Because no one waited for me anymore." And Lyra understood. Time does not move because it must. It moves because it is witnessed. Because someone cares enough to mark the moment. So she placed her hand to her chest. Felt her own rhythm. Then gently pressed it to the heart of the clock. "I remember," she said. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the clock began to tick. Not loud. Not fast. But surely. And all across Queneth, people gasped. They remembered how it felt to be in time. To age. To grow. To mean something. And a single chime echoed through the hills, low, golden, tender. When Lyra looked to the sky that night, something had changed. A new constellation had appeared, not forged in fire, but in quiet. 7 stars. No names. But they hummed. Low and lovely, like a melody waiting for a voice. She followed their sound, through rivers that whispered backward, across fields where no footsteps stayed, until she reached a lake where nothing was reflected. Above it, the stars hummed louder. She stepped into the water. It was not cold. Not wet. It was memory. She sank gently, not downward, but inward. And there, in a space between breath and story, she saw the stars. They were children. Lost ones. Dreamers who had given everything to light the sky. Not for glory. Not for power. But so the lonely would have something beautiful to look up to. But they were tired now. Not dead. Just waiting. Waiting for someone to remind them that light is not a burden. Lyra reached into her chest. And for the first time, she pulled not a thread, but a piece of her own light. It hurt. Softly. Beautifully. She gave it to the stars. And they bloomed. Their hum turned into harmony. And the sky became a song. One that could be heard only in silence. It floated at the edge of the world. Where the stars bowed low to touch the sea, where the wind no longer howled but hummed, there drifted a single lantern, small, quiet, and glowing with the sorrow of 1,000 forgotten wishes. It had no tether. No bearer. No flame. And yet it burned, soft as breath, steady as hope. Lyra found it one night while walking the shoreline of the northern silence, where even the waves refused to speak. She saw it from a distance, hovering just above the sand, like it had been waiting. She knelt beside it. Inside the lantern's glass, she saw not light, but memories. Tiny ones. Faint. Fading. A child's wish for their mother to return. A sailor's prayer for stars to guide him home. A lonely voice asking not to be forgotten. They pulsed like whispers too soft to be heard. And Lyra wept. Not because they were lost, but because no one had come for them. Until now. She touched the lantern, and it flickered, almost startled. "You're still burning," she said gently. Even without being seen. And the lantern answered. Not in words. But in warmth. It pulsed once. And then opened. Not like a box. Not like a door. But like a heart. Light spilled forth, not bright, not blinding, but true. It danced across the shore, weaving shapes in the air. Letters never delivered. Hands never held. Songs never sung aloud. All of them. Waiting. Lyra took her needle. Her thread was thin now, so thin. But enough. She stitched the light back into the world. Not into the stars, not into the sky, but into the air itself. So that no wish would ever vanish unseen again. And the lantern dimmed. Not in death, but in peace. It had done its duty. And it was no longer alone. She returned home one dusk beneath a copper sky. But the wishing forest did not greet her. It stood still. Too still. Branches stiff with silence. Leaves heavy with unspoken fear. The trees did not sing. Not because they had nothing to say, but because they were holding their breath. Lyra stepped inside, and the hush pressed close, an old friend now twisted by worry. She walked the path to her cottage. The ivy had withered. The stream had forgotten how to babble. Even the shadows seemed reluctant to move. And then she saw them. Figures wrapped in bark and sorrow. The guardians of the forest. They were once caretakers of all that dreamed beneath leaves, shapers of wind, listeners of roots. But now, they were stone silent, eyes closed, hands bound in golden vines that pulsed with pain. They had not died. They had chosen to sleep. To protect something deeper. To keep something hidden. Beneath the roots, Lyra found it. A seed. Not small. Not simple. But ancient. And afraid. Why? She whispered. And the seed answered with a tremble. Because if I grow, I will remember everything. Lyra's fingers shook. She understood. This was the first seed, the one planted when the world was still song, before sorrow had a name. If it bloomed, it would awaken every forgotten grief the land had ever swallowed. But also, every hope. Every joy. Every light that never had the chance to shine. Lyra pressed her palm to the soil. Let it bloom, she said softly. I'll remember with you. And the forest shivered. The seed cracked. Roots spread. Not to take, but to give. And in the stillness, the trees exhaled. One by one, the guardians opened their eyes. And the forest wept in bloom. The sky had always been Lyra's guide. But she had never imagined it could bleed. She first noticed the cracks on a moonless night, hairline fractures across the velvet black, like a mirror too weary to hold its own reflection. Through them leaked not light, but shadow, thin and fast, like forgotten promises unraveling into mist. She climbed the old hill above her cottage, heart tight, thread in hand. And there she saw her. A girl standing where the sky should have been. Her skin shimmered like dusk. Her hair flowed like wind through broken windows. Her eyes, wide and wild, reflected every sorrow the stars had ever swallowed. Who are you? Lyra whispered. And the girl answered. I am the sky you forgot. She lifted her arms, and the constellations writhed. Some flickered. Some vanished. You've mended so much, the girl said, voice a storm without rain. But you never asked where the broken pieces went. Lyra stepped closer. She could feel it now, the ache, the cost. Every soul she had saved, every thread she had woven, had left its mark. Not in her, but in this girl. The sky had taken her burden. And now, it was shattering under the weight. I'm sorry, Lyra said. I didn't know. The girl blinked. A single tear fell, silver, silent. You did what they needed. But now, I need you. Lyra reached forward. And for the first time, she weaved not a thread, but a bond. She gave the girl her name. Not Lyra. But what lay beneath? Hope. Tenderness. The quiet ache of believing anyway. The girl gasped. And the cracks in the sky slowly healed. Not perfectly. But truly. And as dawn rose, streaking the heavens with rose and gold, the girl made of sky whispered back. Thank you. For remembering me. Not all paths are made of stone and soil. Some are born of choices. Of silences. Of songs unsung. Lyra discovered such a path one twilight when the stars hung low like lanterns strung across the breath of dusk. She was walking the meadow beyond the forest's edge when she noticed something strange beneath her feet. Not earth. Not grass. Absence. A trail of empty space that shimmered faintly, as though it had once remembered how to be a road, but had since forgotten. It curled and twisted through the field like a memory on the verge of leaving forever. And as she followed it, the world behind her grew faint. Like it no longer believed she was real. This path, she soon learned, did not stay still. It shifted. Sometimes forward, sometimes backward, sometimes sideways into places that did not exist, until she stepped there. She saw herself, once, a younger version, sowing wishes into cloud stuff, her smile unbroken by grief. And then again, older, with tears dried stiff against her cheeks, holding her last thread like a blade. This path was not made to guide. It was made to remember. And then, she came upon the door. Alone, standing in the air. No walls. No hinges. Just a door, pulsing with light and ache. Painted across its surface were names. All the names she had not saved. She reached for the handle, and the path behind her disappeared. You cannot go back, a voice murmured from the wood. I never wanted to, she replied. She opened the door. Inside was nothing. And everything. A place made of choices unmade. Threads left untouched. The ache of what might have been. She stepped through. And the path did not return. Because it had never been meant to bring her back. Only to show her how far she had come. It was raining stars. Softly. Gently. Like the heavens had grown tired of holding their own light and had begun letting go. Lyra walked through the silver mist, her shawl soaked with celestial dew. Around her, the world was quiet. Too quiet. As though something sacred had been lost in the hush. Then she saw it. A mirror, standing upright in the middle of a ruined garden, framed by vines that whispered as they curled. It was cracked. Not broken, splintered. The way hearts splinter when they try to remain whole. She approached, expecting to see herself. But she didn't. She saw every person she had ever loved. And failed. The boy who wandered into a dream and never returned. The fire child who flickered out before she could reach him. The woman who spoke only in riddles and died before finishing the last. They looked at her through the glass, eyes quiet, not angry, just unfinished. What do I do with you? She whispered. The mirror shivered. And then, they smiled. All of them. And faded. One by one. Until only she remained in the reflection. Tired. Threadbare. Glowing. Still here. Still weaving. She reached out and touched the glass. It didn't feel like glass. It felt like a friend's hand. And the mirror whispered. You are not meant to save everything. But you are meant to try. And that was enough. The mist cleared. And the stars rose, once more held gently in the sky. The wind was wild that night. It came howling over the hills like a memory too loud to forget, tearing through branches, screaming down the riverbeds. The stars disappeared, swallowed by clouds that rolled like grief over the moon's quiet face. And Lyra stood in its center. Alone. Barefoot. Thread in hand. The storm did not come to destroy. It came to challenge. Because even storms want to be understood. Lightning struck near her feet. Thunder cracked like ancient drums in the bones of the world. Rain fell not in drops, but in rivers, songs sung too fast to hear. And Lyra began to sing. Not over the storm. With it. Her voice wove between the wind's fury, wrapped around the thunder, softened the edges of the lightning. Her thread glowed in her hand, silver and gold and something older still. She spun. She danced. And the storm, for a moment, did not rage. It listened. And in that stillness, she heard it. I am not wrath, the wind wept. I am what grief becomes when it forgets to cry. And Lyra cried for it. She let her tears fall with the rain. Let her voice crack like thunder. Let her heart open wide enough to hold the whole sky's sorrow. And when the storm ended, the earth was quiet. Not broken, but baptized. And the flowers that bloomed days later glowed with the color of morning turned into music. It existed in the space no one noticed. Not on any map. Not in any book. The library between heartbeats could only be found in the stillness just after a gasp, or the hush before a tear falls. It was a place made of silence stitched with meaning, a cathedral of pages that breathed. Lyra arrived not by walking, but by remembering. She had paused under a crescent moon, pressed her hand to her chest, and listened. And in the second between one heartbeat and the next, the world shifted. She was standing in a hall made of ink and starlight. Shelves rose into eternity. Lanterns hung like floating souls. The air was thick with stories, not told, but waiting. A figure stood at the center desk. Old as dust. Soft as dusk. They did not speak. Instead, they handed Lyra a book. It had no title. No cover. No spine. Just wait. She opened it. Inside, herself. Not as she was, but as she had been. A child with tangled hair, sewing clouds into blankets. A girl crying beside a broken loom. A weaver of stars whispering apologies to the night. And pages yet blank, trembling with ink not yet spilled. Is this all I am? She asked. The figure shook their head. It is all you have held. But not all you are. She understood. This was not a library of knowledge. It was a library of burden. Each book a person. Each chapter a wound. Each ending a question. She walked the aisles, fingers tracing leather and linen. And then she saw it. A shelf with no books. Just threads. Tied. Knotted. Frayed. Each one pulsing faintly with names she had mended. She placed her own thread among them. And it pulsed back, strong, gold, and glowing. The silence deepened, but did not feel empty. It felt full. And when she stepped back into the world, the stars above her shimmered as if they, too, had read her story. Music had always lived in the world. In rivers. In wind. In footfalls on morning frost. But there was a song that had never ended. Because it had never been finished. The Everchant. Lyra heard its echo first in her sleep, a melody so aching, so beautiful, it bent her dreams into tears. She awoke with the tune wrapped around her ribs like ivy, soft and insistent. She followed it through mist and memory, across mountains that breathed and valleys that sighed. The song pulled her not toward a place, but toward a truth. At last, she arrived at a hollowed tree older than language. Inside, 7 figures stood. Not alive. Not dead. Frozen mid-note. Each one holding an instrument. Each one with a mouth half open. Each one missing only her. Lyra stepped forward. A harp of moon thread waited in the center. She sat. She breathed. And she played. Not from knowledge. From memory. From ache. From love. The Everchant rose around her, wrapped through her, lifted the 7 from stillness into song. Their eyes opened, glowing with starlit tears. Their voices joined hers, and the song grew, not louder, but deeper. It became a tide. A heartbeat. A call to all things that had ever lost their way. And Lyra sang not to end the song, but to become part of it. Forever. There came a night when even the stars looked afraid. They flickered. They huddled. They watched. Because Lyra had arrived at the end. Not of her journey, but of the world itself. The edge was not a cliff. Not a wall. It was a feeling. Of standing on the last sentence of a story and not knowing if the next page would appear. The sky here was empty. No stars. No moon. No sound. Only a single thread hung in the air. Gold. Fraying. Waiting. Lyra stepped closer. The thread trembled. She knew what it was. The last connection between what was and what might still be. If it snapped, everything would unravel. Not with noise, but with silence. And so, with hands worn from weaving and a heart soft from too much wonder, Lyra reached out. She did not pull it. She did not tie it. She sang to it. A lullaby made of every soul she had mended. Every sorrow she had kissed. Every star she had whispered back into brightness. And the thread sang back. Together, they wove something new. Not an ending. Not a beginning. But a promise. And in the quiet that followed, the stars returned. One by one. Not as they had been. But as they were always meant to be. The sky had not slept in centuries. It kept its eyes open through wars and whispers, through births and burnings, afraid that if it closed them, the world would vanish into the hush. But stars, like souls, cannot burn forever. And neither could Lyra. She felt it one night as she walked beneath the velvet dome of twilight, the way the sky shimmered not with strength, but with strain. The stars trembled like eyelids fighting rest. She climbed the tallest hill she had ever found. There, she unspooled her last length of golden thread. Not to mend, but to cradle. And as she sang to the sky, she wove her thread into a lullaby too gentle for words. Sleep, O sky, in silver hush, I'll keep your stars from turning dust. Rest your moons in woven fold, I'll guard the dreams you long to hold. The clouds hushed. The constellations leaned close. Even the wind bowed. And then, the sky blinked. Once. Twice. And finally, it closed its eyes. For the first time since the first breath of the world, the sky slept. And Lyra, who had mended dreams and woven silence, curled beside it, one hand on her heart, the other on the now still thread. She, too, slept. And the stars dreamed. When morning broke, it did not rise. It unfolded. Soft and slow like a sigh from an old song remembered. It poured across the hills and treetops not in brilliance, but in tenderness. The world stirred. Not startled awake, but kissed from slumber. And Lyra rose with it. Different. She had grown no older, but lighter. As if the sky had gifted her back what she had once given away, pieces of herself. Every thread returned. Every sorrow released. Every story wrapped in stillness. The forest sang for her return. The sea shimmered in greeting. The mountains, in their stone-deep voices, whispered her name not as a question, but a blessing. And in the valley of stars she had once called home, a garden bloomed where the soil had once been silent. Each flower glowed with memory. Each petal held a tale. And the people, those she'd touched, mended, mourned, came to her not as followers, not as worshippers, but as family. They sat around her as she hummed the old lullabies, thread curling around her fingers not as duty, but delight. And Lyra smiled. Because for the first time, she wove for joy. It came to her one evening, when the sun turned the sky to honey and dusk began painting the world in hushed tones. A single thread, unlike any she had ever held. It shimmered with every color and none. It pulsed not with need, but invitation. Lyra understood. This was the last. Not because it marked an end, but because it asked for a choice. To weave one final story. Her own. She sat beneath the willow whose leaves were still feathers, where the dream boy had once been. Around her, the world waited, not in fear, but in faith. She took up the thread. She didn't rush. She didn't fear. She simply began. And as she wove, the story poured out, not just her own, but everyone's. The lonely. The lost. The loved. The ones who listened. The ones who forgot. The ones still waiting. She wove them all into the final thread, her fingers slow, her soul sure, and when she tied the last knot, the world breathed out. Not an end. A beginning made whole. The thread disappeared. And Lyra stood. Light bloomed around her, not blinding, but familiar. Like the first candle lit in a cold room. She looked to the stars. And they bowed. Because she had not only mended the sky. She had taught it how to dream again. Epilogue, when you look up. They still speak of her. Not as a goddess. Not as a myth. But as a promise. The star weaver. The girl who stitched broken dreams into wonder. Who walked through silence and sorrow with hands full of thread and heart full of hope. They say, if you stand very still on a windless night, you can hear her lullaby in the hush between heartbeats. You can feel her warmth in the thread of your spine. You can see her light in the stars that never fall. And they say, when you look up, you are never alone. Because someone, somewhere, has woven you into the sky.